They say the best revenge is living well, but sometimes the best revenge is simply being exactly who you are when the world expects you to be less. Kenneth Reeves answered his granddaughter's video call on a phone with a cracked screen, his old pickup in the driveway behind him.
Grandpa, hi. So, about the wedding, there's something I need to tell you, and please don't be mad.
I'm listening, sweetheart. What's troubling you?
It's the Whitmores. They feel you might not fit the aesthetic of the wedding. You know, with your jeans and old shirts. They want everything to be picture perfect.
Fit the aesthetic.
I know it sounds awful, Grandpa, but they're paying for everything, and it's so important to Harrison's family. Please understand.
Don't worry about me. I'll be fine.
He said it so gently that Olivia could almost believe him. Then he closed the laptop and sat motionless as the sky turned the color of a bruise. He got behind the wheel of his 1992 Ford pickup and drove toward town through the quiet evening, the man who owned half the shipping lanes on the East Coast. The next morning, Kenneth guided his old Ford through the gates of Reeves Shipping, past mile-long rows of containers stacked like metal mountains under a pale sky. From the boardroom window, CFO David Asher watched the battered pickup pull into a reserved spot marked with faded initials, KR.
Mr. Reeves, I wasn't expecting you today.
Just checking in. How are the eastern routes?
Q3 margins are up 12%. The Baltimore automation is already paying for itself.
And Newport.
We're acquiring the old Pierpoint fleet. It doubles our New England capacity.
Do it.
Kenneth listened to reports worth more than the GDP of small nations, then walked back to his 30-year-old pickup, passing executives who had no idea he owned the place. He never mentioned the wedding. He never mentioned Olivia. He just drove home, the same man in faded chambray and steel-toe boots, a quiet king returning to his modest castle. That evening, Margaret Reeves sat in her living room, phone in hand, the absence of her father's name on the wedding list burning in her mind.
Olivia, I just spoke to your grandfather. He didn't say much, but I know something's wrong. What happened?
Mom, it's complicated. The Whitmores think Grandpa doesn't fit the aesthetic. They want every photo to look perfect.
Perfect? Olivia, that man raised me alone. He's the kindest soul I know. You can't seriously be doing this.
I tried to push back, but Harrison's parents are paying for everything. They have a reputation to protect.
You uninvited your own grandfather because of a reputation? What did you tell him?
I told him it was about the vibe. I feel awful, Mom, but the wedding is in a week. What else could I do?
You could stand up for your family, Olivia. You could tell those people your grandfather's name carries more weight than theirs ever will.
It's too late. The Whitmores made it clear if Grandpa comes, there will be a scene. I just want the day to be beautiful.
Margaret set the phone down. On the coffee table, the wedding invitation stared back at her. Her father's name scratched out in ink, a wound made official. 3 days later, Kenneth Reeves walked into Reeves Shipping headquarters, carrying a worn canvas bag, his chambray shirt tucked into jeans. The boardroom was already set with nautical charts and quarterly reports.
The Pierpoint acquisition closes Friday. Newport will officially be our third largest East Coast hub.
Good. How's the channel depth for the bigger vessels?
No restrictions under 200 feet. The harbor master's already approved our mooring lease.
I think I'll take the boat out this weekend. A little shakedown cruise.
The Reeves, sir? You haven't taken her out in 3 years. She's been dry docked in Rhode Island.
Time to get her back in the water. Have Captain Lars ready the crew by Friday.
David opened his mouth, then closed it. When Kenneth Reeves made up his mind, no one argued. The old man rarely explained himself. As the meeting dispersed, Kenneth's gaze drifted to the window, to the horizon beyond the cranes and container stacks. Somewhere out there, his granddaughter was planning a wedding he wasn't welcome at. He said nothing more about it, but on his way out he paused by the door, a half smile on his lips, the kind a man wears when he knows the tide is about to turn. The wedding rehearsal on the cliff lawn was a study in precision. Olivia walked the aisle 3 times, the Whitmores watching like art critics at an auction.
Remember, Olivia, these photos will be in the society pages forever. No distractions, no
Rustic elements?
Rustic. She means Grandpa.
80 miles north, Kenneth Reeves stepped onto the gleaming deck of his yacht. The Reeves, as Captain Lars ran final checks on the bridge.
We'll reach Newport by noon, Mr. Reeves. The harbor master is expecting us.
Make it 11. And no need to announce ourselves. Let's just slide in quietly.
One more thing, Olivia. We want no surprises. The Whitmore name cannot be associated with anything. Unfortunate.
Like the man who raised my mother? Unfortunate.
As the wedding party returned to the estate for dinner, Kenneth Reeves stood at the bow of a 240-foot vessel that sliced through the Atlantic like a silent promise. He hadn't told anyone where he was going. That, after all, was the point. The morning of the wedding broke clear and sharp. Guests in silk and pearls flowed across the cliff lawn, the harbor glittering below.
He really isn't coming. My own father, shut out of this day.
Olivia appeared at the end of the aisle, her gown a cascade of ivory silk. Her smile was practiced, her grip on the bouquet too tight.
Flawless. Just as planned.
Newport Harbor in sight, sir. The cliffs are just past the breakwater.
Slow down. Give them time to start.
Far below, the yacht Reeves glided past the outer buoys, its white hull catching the sun like a moving cathedral. At the altar, Olivia barely heard the officiant's words. Her eyes swept the front row, where only one seat was painfully empty.
This is a mistake. The biggest of her life.
Kenneth Reeves stepped to the bow, the altar now a small white dot on the cliffs. He folded his arms and waited for the music to reach his ears. A murmur rippled through the back rows. Guests turned, shielding their eyes against the sun as an immense white yacht glided past the harbor mouth.
Mr. Whitmore, a vessel is heading straight for the ceremony backdrop. It's enormous.
Call the harbor master. Tell them to divert it immediately. This is a private event.
Not now. Please, not a disruption now.
The yacht kept coming. It dominated the view, a floating palace of glass and fiberglass, dwarfing the sailboats scattering in its path.
Who on earth would bring a ship like that here on today of all days?
On the dock, crew members moved with quiet efficiency, preparing the gangplank. But no one on the cliff could see who was aboard. The officiant paused, unsure whether to continue. Olivia's hands trembled, the bouquet quivering against the silk of her dress.
Harrison, that name on the stern, it says Reeves.
Harrison Whitmore's face went pale as he squinted at the gold script. The name resonated somewhere deep in the ledger of his social memory, but not yet fully surfaced. The yacht dropped anchor with a low mechanical rumble, its stern settling directly behind the flower arch, framing the ceremony like a stage backdrop. In gold script, the name Reeves blazed from the stern, reflecting the wedding tent across the water.
Reeves. Catherine, Reeves Shipping. That's the man who owns half the Atlantic fleet.
But that's... Olivia's grandfather is named Reeves. You don't think?
Find Olivia's grandfather, right now, don't you see? That old man in the flannel shirt, he owns this vessel.
Reeves? No. Grandpa drives a 30-year-old truck. This has to be a coincidence.
The Whitmores rose from their seats, abandoning decorum. They moved through the guests like people fleeing a sinking ship.
If Kenneth Reeves learns we excluded him, this wedding becomes a footnote in a social disaster.
They didn't wait for an answer. Burdened by 15 minutes of belated realization, they made their way toward Margaret Reeves. The ceremony stumbled to a halt, and on the dock below, a gangplank finally touched the shore, but no one on the cliff yet saw who stood at the top.
Margaret, where is your father? We need to find him immediately.
He's on the yacht. That's him.
Margaret's voice broke as she pointed toward the dock, where an old man in faded chambray was stepping onto the gangplank. Kenneth Reeves walked down the gangplank in the same work clothes he had worn for 40 years, his silver hair catching the wind. He didn't hurry. He didn't look up at the cliff. He simply walked, hands in his pockets, as if strolling to his own backyard. Guests parted as he approached the lawn, whispers spreading like fire through dry grass.
We've made a terrible mistake.
Grandpa?
She froze, her bouquet forgotten, the officiant's words trailing into silence. Kenneth reached the edge of the aisle, and without a word to anyone, he simply stood there, a quiet man in a frayed shirt who owned the ocean behind him.
Grandpa? But you're here.
He didn't explain. He didn't apologize. He just extended his arm, the same arm that had lifted her onto his shoulders when she was 5.
How can I say no to this? How can I ever make this right?
Tears spilled down her cheeks as she slipped her hand around his worn sleeve. They turned together, and the ceremony began again, this time with the man who should have been there all along. The officiant cleared his throat and continued, the words of commitment floating past the gleaming yacht.
We've been fools, absolute fools.
He outclassed us without saying a word.
When the vows were spoken, Kenneth simply nodded, the proudest man in the tent, still in his flannel. He walked her back down the aisle, not as a guest but as the foundation she had nearly misplaced. At the cocktail hour, Kenneth stood alone at the cliff's edge, a glass of ice water in his hand, his back to the silk and champagne. Harrison Whitmore crossed the lawn with deliberate steps, his face tight with rehearsed humility.
Mr. Reeves, your vessel is breathtaking. I must apologize, we did not fully understand your position.
Unnecessary. I know exactly who I am.
Harrison opened his mouth, then closed it. After a beat, he nodded and retreated, his shoulders hitched higher than before. Olivia watched from the edge of the tent, her champagne glass forgotten in her hand.
He didn't need to raise his voice. He just let the water do the talking.
Margaret found him a moment later, her voice thick with emotion.
Dad, you were perfect.
She's married now. The rest is just water under the bridge.
When the band struck up a slow waltz, Olivia crossed the dance floor alone, her dress whispering against the polished wood.
Grandpa, will you dance with me?
I thought you'd never ask.
They turned slowly under the string lights, her fingers light on his shoulder, his hand firm at her back. The room around them blurred.
I'm so sorry, Grandpa, for everything.
You're here now. That's all that matters.
She rested her head against his shoulder, and for a full minute they simply moved, the apology floating between them like the last note of a song.
He could have humiliated me. Instead, he just held me.
She's still my little girl. Always will be.
The waltz ended, but they stood a moment longer, an old man in work clothes and a bride in silk, two halves of one family, finally whole. One crisp Saturday morning, Olivia arrived on Kenneth's porch with a bag of fresh pastries and 2 steaming cups of coffee.
I figured if I'm going to make up for lost time, it starts with breakfast.
She found him under the hood of the old pickup, grease on his forearms. He handed her a rag without a word.
You're going to ruin that pretty dress.
It's just cotton, and I want to help.
That evening she sat with him and a yellowed photo album, tracing faces of people she only half remembered.
You kept all of these, even the ones where I'm making faces.
Especially those.
The following Sunday, the family gathered for a barbecue. Kenneth flipped burgers while Olivia set the table, and for once, no one mentioned aesthetics. As the sun set, Kenneth pressed a small box into Olivia's hand. Inside was a silver compass. "Find your way back," the engraving read. A month after the barbecue, the Whitmores invited Kenneth to a formal dinner at the estate. Candles flickered, but the air was thin with unspoken intent.
Kenneth, we've been discussing a new logistics venture. Your fleet's capacity, our East Coast connections, a perfect fit.
It would unite our families in a way beyond sentiment, a true partnership.
This is just another way to latch onto his name. Don't do it, Grandpa.
You want my ships to carry Whitmore cargo. In exchange for what?
Equity stake, board seats, whatever you deem fair. We want to be part of what you've built.
They think a few smiles and a dinner can rewrite years of dismissal. They're still measuring me by their own yardstick. I've built my company one shipping lane at a time, not one dinner at a time. No, but I'll tell you what I will do. I'll teach you everything I know if you promise to use it for more than your own bottom line.
The silence that followed was heavier than any contract. Harrison Whitmore simply nodded, humbled again, as the old man turned back to his plate. 2 weeks after the dinner, David Asher walked into the boardroom with a file thick enough to stop a conversation mid-sentence.
The Port Authority has frozen our expansion permits, anonymous complaints about environmental impact, and everyone traces back to a Whitmore contact.
So Harrison decided to fight dirty. Let him.
But that afternoon, Olivia pulled up in her car and walked toward his porch with a face that said the world had tilted again.
Grandpa, Harrison's father won't stop. He says you embarrassed the family, and now every dinner turns into a war. I don't know how much more I can take.
Sweetheart, some men only learn when the cost outweighs their pride. Maybe I've been too quiet.
That night, Kenneth's old pickup rolled through the gates of the Whitmore estate, its engine barely audible over the crunch of gravel.
I was wondering when you'd come. Those permits are dead, Reeves. Your expansion is over.
You think one complaint file can topple a lifetime? I came here because Olivia's tears are worth more than my pride. But hurt her again, and I'll show the world the real Whitmore ledgers.
Harrison's hand trembled as it moved toward the folder. The old man had left the door open, but it was a door that led to a cliff. Harrison stared at the closed door for a full minute. Outside, the night seemed to press against the windows like a held breath.
Catherine, we underestimated him. He's not just old money, he's old war.
You provoked him? Harrison, he could dismantle us with a single call to the financial press.
I thought, what? That he'd roll over? He said he'd protect Olivia at any cost.
The old Ford idled at the estate gate, its headlights carving a narrow path through the manicured hedges.
Grandpa, I'm so sorry. I never wanted this. I'll talk to Harrison.
You stay out of it. This is between me and his father now.
But if he doesn't stop, if he keeps hurting you, then I'll do what I have to.
I won't let anyone tear this family apart, not even me.
He hugged her then, and the silence between them was a promise, the kind built on decades of love and 2 days of hard-won respect. The next morning, Kenneth's phone rang before sunrise. It was Harrison, voice stripped of smugness, raw and pleading.
Reeves, I'll pull the complaints. I'll fix everything. Just please, don't release whatever you have on me.
It's not about what I have, Harrison. It's about what you're willing to do. Are you ready to let Olivia live her life without your poison?
Yes, I'll do anything. Just name it.
Get the permits reinstated. Apologize to your son and my granddaughter. And never mention aesthetics again.
I agree, all of it. I'll call you when it's done.
Kenneth hung up and sat heavily on his porch steps, the old wood creaking under a weight that wasn't physical.
Dad, I heard about the permits. What did you do?
I gave him an ultimatum, for Olivia's sake. But I don't know if I've ended a war or just bought a truce.
You did the right thing. Now let's see if they're the kind of people who can keep a promise.
The following week, David Asher called with news. The expansion permits had been reinstated, and an anonymous donation had funded a marine conservation project in Newport. Kenneth simply nodded. Then Olivia's car pulled into the gravel drive, and she carried an envelope.
Grandpa, Harrison wrote to me personally. He apologized for everything and said he wants to earn back our respect.
The letter, in Harrison's own handwriting, promised to honor the Reeves name and invited Kenneth to a private dinner.
Pride is a hard thing to choke down. He managed it. That counts for something.
That evening at the Whitmore estate, the dining room held a different weight. Harrison stood as Kenneth entered.
Mr. Reeves, I've been a fool. I hope you'll let me try to make amends.
We'd be honored to host the family more often. No more talk of aesthetics.
Kenneth's eyes crinkled. He reached for his water glass. To family, he said softly, and the clinking glasses drowned out any memory of the word that had started it all. Later that night, Kenneth sat alone on his porch, the stars sharp as broken glass. The old wood held his weight like an old friend. Olivia's footsteps were soft on the gravel. She didn't speak, just settled beside him, her shoulder touching his.
I was thinking about the creek behind your old house. We used to launch paper boats and watch them float away.
You'd cry when they sank. I told you they'd find their way one way or another.
You always knew how to make things right, even when I didn't.
It's not about right or wrong. It's about whether we keep showing up. You showed up tonight?
The next morning, they walked to a small pond behind Kenneth's property. Olivia carried a folded piece of paper. She knelt and placed a tiny paper boat on the water. It wobbled, then caught the current and drifted toward the center, steady and sure.
No matter how far it goes, it'll always reflect the same sky, kind of like us.
Kenneth didn't answer. He just stood there, his reflection rippling beside hers, the paper boat carrying all the words that didn't need to be spoken. A month later, the Reeves family hosted a dinner. Not at the estate, but at Kenneth's modest home, where the driveway held both a vintage Ford and a silver Mercedes. Around the kitchen table, Harrison Sr. poured wine for Kenneth while Olivia and Margaret set out mismatched plates. No one mentioned the word that had once cleaved them.
Kenneth, I've learned more from your silence than from 100 boardrooms. Thank you for not giving up on us.
Family isn't about giving up. It's about giving in to something bigger than yourself.
He turned loss into legacy, and he let me be part of it.
They ate and laughed, the kind of laughter that doesn't need a reason. After dessert, Kenneth walked Harrison out to the Mercedes. The moon hung low over the harbor.
The Pierpoint deal will change the East Coast. You've built an empire, Kenneth.
Empires crumble. Good boats float. Good families endure.
Harrison nodded, and when he drove away, Kenneth stood alone for a moment. But he wasn't truly alone, not anymore. He walked back to the porch, where Olivia was waiting with a blanket over her shoulders. The night had turned cool, but neither minded.
Harrison really means it, doesn't he?
He does. Took him long enough.
Will I ever stop feeling like I almost threw this away?
That feeling is a compass. It'll keep pointing you home.
They sat in silence, the old swing groaning softly. The harbor lights winked below, and somewhere on the water, a ship sounded its horn. The next morning, Kenneth stood at the bow of the Reeves, a chipped mug of coffee in his hand. The yacht cut through the glassy water like a quiet blessing. Olivia stood beside him, hair tangled in salt air. She looked at the horizon, then at him. The question she didn't ask was already answered.
You see that lighthouse? When I was your age, I swore I'd never need one. Turns out I did, but I built it myself.
She leaned into his arm, and for a long moment, the only sound was the water and the quiet assurance that some things once lost can be found again. That evening, back on his porch, Kenneth untied his worn boots and set them side by side. The old wood creaked, but the sound was a welcome one.
Never imagined a mess like that could turn into this. A full table, a full heart.
The screen door opened, and Olivia stepped out with 2 mugs of coffee. She handed one to him and sat on the step below, leaning against his knee.
You know, for a man who owns half the Atlantic, you make terrible coffee.
Never said I was a barista. Just a man with a boat.
They laughed, the sound carrying over the quiet lawn and out toward the harbor, where the lights of the Reeves glimmered like a steadfast star. Tomorrow, Kenneth would drive his old pickup to the dock, just as he'd done for decades. But the man behind the wheel was lighter now.
Thanks for never giving up on me, Grandpa.
You're a Reeves. We don't know how to quit.
She leaned into him once more, and the world settled into its proper order, not because of yachts or fortunes, but because a family had chosen to hold on.